Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Friday lunchtime Posturite webinar. My name's John Ridd, and I shall be taking the anchor role for today's talk. This one is entitled, Are the DSE regulations fit for purpose in 2014? An interesting question, because of course they've been around since 1992, with precious little change specifically in the regulations since then. This webinar is going to be presented by Catherine Metters, who I'm sure will be known to many of you. Catherine is the principal consultant for the WorkRight consultancy division of Posturite. But unfortunately, before we can get on to the talk, we've got to deal with a couple of housekeeping points. Firstly, if you have any technical problems during the presentation, you should have a panel on the right of your screen. Please use that to text in to our technical people the problems you're having, and they'll try and resolve those. If you are unsuccessful in getting anything sorted out, then my apologies, but you will be able to download or to log into the webinar later this afternoon, or from this afternoon, when it'll be up on the Posturite website. The other matter I need to mention at this stage is it also deals with that panel, and it's to do with any questions you might have about the presentation, any questions for Catherine, then please type these in, and hopefully I will then, at the end of the presentation, I will be able to put as many, or I will try to put as many as I can, as many of these as I can to her. Now, let's not take up any more of your lunchtime with this introduction. I'll hand you straight over to Catherine for her talk on the DSE regulations and whether they are still fit for purpose. So, Catherine, over to you, please.
Thank you, John. Yes, DSE regulations, fit for purpose. Funnily enough, I've had an awful lot of conversations recently about this, and no doubt the conversations will continue afterwards too. So let's see whether they're all in agreement. Okay, so slight technical problem going on with my slides here. Bear with me a second. Right, not quite sure why that was, but there again, I've got my technical people, so we'll see if this solves it. Right, so the regulations, as you can see, we've got a copy of them up in front of us. I'm sure that you're all very aware of them, and as John clearly said, they were brought out in 1992. Unfortunately, I do remember them being brought out, and they were slightly amended in 2002. Why were they brought out? Well, they were brought out to implement the European DSE directive. And I think really they decided to put the directive together because the volume of DSE work that was being done within Europe was huge, and it was causing all sorts of problems. So I think, good reason for them coming out. What is the situation today, though? Well, we are, from a personal perspective, I'm seeing a lot more inquiries, particularly around sort of headaches and migraines, as well as stress concerns with people who are using technology. We've also got different challenges as well. We have lots of different devices and lots of different ways of working from when these regulations first came out. What about the use of technology? It's so much wider now. People use it at home and at work, and the lines are very much blurred. I'm sure you, like me, do a lot of internet shopping. Perhaps I shouldn't do as much as I do, but I look at my daughter working, and a lot of her coursework is all online, but also a lot of her socializing is also done online. So a lot of volume through this technology. And then the last one on my slide there, I mean, the old chestnut, I think, is as current today as it has been in the past, in the fact that preventative advice is still not really seen as very important or even relevant. People really don't take notice of some of the foundations until they have a problem. So I think we'd all agree that we still, 20 odd years on since the regulations came out, still have DSE problems. And so why is that? Well, I think we still see poor fit between people who use the equipment and the equipment itself. As I said, the volume of use, the way they use equipment, I think, the poor setup. I'm still amazed sometimes at what I see when I go out and look at people working. I think the lack of task variation is something that we are seeing less of, and I think we will continue to perhaps see less of it in traditional office environments. Everything is done via technology, or nearly everything. However, I suppose there might be a slight light on the horizon, the fact that because we could use technology in other places, that may give us some opportunities. And as I said, new technologies, new ways of working, the control is less, and some of our traditional measures to prevent people developing problems are no longer able to be used. I'm going to show you one of my favourite quips. The productivity paradox. I love this. Robert Solow's 1987 quip: "You can see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics." Now, being a little bit of a Luddite, I absolutely adore that. But technology, I have to admit, does have huge benefits. It would be good to see that we're able to realise those benefits, both in the work that we do, but also in the health of our people as well. So, coming back to the topic, here to talk about whether the regulations are still fit for purpose. So I thought I would outline the case for. I think the case for the regulations is that we still have significant issues, and people want specific guidance, and there's no two ways about it, but the DSE regulations does give some very clear guidance. The regulations do actually cover different devices and ways of working, and I'm going to go through that a little bit later, because it was made very generic and very wide to try and future-proof it, and there is some guidance within the regulations and the guidance document. It does clearly describe employers' responsibilities. I think most people are left in no doubt as to what they are required to do to look after their staff. It provides a format for people to use, particularly with providing an example risk assessment. And now, it wasn't in the past, but now it is a free download, so it is accessible to a lot of people. So there's a lot of really good things still about those regulations. What's the case against? Well, questionable success. Did it fulfill its brief? Is the focus now very much within those regulations about meeting minimum requirements rather than fulfilling the needs of the person? That obviously, as an ergonomist, is very important to me. I think sometimes the regulations have encouraged maybe a tick box exercise rather than looking at how we can help people work. Within the guidance, if you've looked at it recently, I think we would all agree that the illustrations are very much out of date and give very much an impression that these regulations are not up to date and maybe not be fit for purpose. And, within the guidance, the wording, the illustrations tends to show that the balance is of a traditional one screen type setup, and for the most of us that is no longer the case. The other thing that I think is lacking in the regulations has been all about employee self-responsibility. Those of us that dabble, I suppose, in looking after people with working at computers, the need for people to take some responsibility for their setup and the way they work is absolutely key into whether it works for them. So I think that may be missing as well. So really, to try and work out whether these regulations are fit for purpose, I'm going to sort of go through some of the common questions I get asked. Here's a list of them. What is the minimum I have to do to comply? When do I have to do a DSE assessment for home workers or remote workers? Do I have to do a DSE assessment on laptops, tablets and smartphones? And do I need to do a DSE assessment for people working in cars? These are very, very common questions. And I suppose this is what I'm thinking. Are we missing the point? Surely the right question is, what is needed for the person to do the job well and for them to remain healthy and safe? So yes, I'm going to talk about the regulations, but I really just want to sort of have a little pause here just to say we need to think clearly about why we're trying to implement the regulations and what the regulations are trying to do. And surely that is to empower people to work well and to keep them safe. Coming on to some of those specific questions, when do I have to do a DSE assessment for home workers? It is a significant issue for many of us these days. We have over 6.5 million people out there working in a flexible way. So we do need guidance as to whether we need to apply certain regulations. If we get it wrong, we do have problems, and we are seeing that some of these issues here are becoming very apparent with people who are working remotely and at home. We do see a creep in the working hours, security issues, more people on the road, more driving issues, which can often compound musculoskeletal problems, difficult to manage stress issues, and as a result, quite often quite a lot of musculoskeletal disorders reported. So is there guidance in the regulations? Well, yes, there is. In the guidance document, it says, section 15, quite clearly that if we are normally using DSE for continuous or no continuous spells for an hour or more or less daily, that we need to apply these regulations. So if we look at the role that the person is performing and they fit this criteria, we have been told we should be applying these regulations. So I think it's quite clear, and it does give us quite, as I say, clear guidance as to whether we should be applying those regulations. Does it actually matter if it's a DSE assessment or other type of risk assessment? You know, if we come back to what I said earlier, it's all about how are we giving people the tools to do the job and to do the job correctly? Coming back to our basics of ergonomics, it's about putting the person at the center and making sure they have the tools to do the job. Another question, do I have to do a DSE assessment on laptops, tablets or smartphones? Is that covered within the regulations? Well, depressingly, I suppose, for the people who don't think they're fit for purpose, this issue is clearly reported in the regulations. It says, as you can see in the guidance note 9, that it does cover other types of displays. And for this, with most of the emerging technologies that we are having to cope with, this actually clearly says to us that we need to be applying these DSE regulations. What about some of these other opportunities? Working in cars, multiple screens, sit-stand desks, and the good old chestnut of hot desking. Well, in our second regulation, it tells us that we must perform a sufficient analysis of risk, so a risk assessment of what somebody is doing for their DSE. So it doesn't really matter what the workstation is at this point, we must look at the risk. And this is then followed up by saying that actually, if we look at a situation and the DSE doesn't comply, we still have the general duty under the Health and Safety at Work Act. But clearly within the regulations it says where a DSE assessment is in use but the DSE regulations do not apply, the assessment of risk and measures taken to control them should take into account the ergonomic factors applicable. So if you're in any doubt, you do an assessment, but make sure you take into account all those DSE factors that you are aware of. So I think clearly it says that it's not so much about complying with DSE, it's about making sure the situation is correct with a thought about those DSE principles. That got a little bit complex, so actually I want to unpeel it a wee bit and come back to one of my favourite things is, you know, people say that looking after people at computer workstations is a very specialist area. And although I would love that to be the case, I actually think that we sometimes make it too complicated. I think sometimes we need to bring things back to our basics, and I'm sorry if some of you have seen this before, but this is my little sort of 5-point plan about how complex I think looking after somebody's working posture whilst using computer equipment should be. And I think that actually anybody can do this. If you are standing to the side of an individual using a mouse, you should be able to see if they're well supported in their chair as described. You should be able to look at their forearm level, see if that's in a good position, and then look further up the body at the head to make sure somebody's supported. Then moving to the back of them, having a look to see if they're symmetrical and whether the arms are close to the body. And then, of course, the most important question is there plenty of movement there? Really, that's as complicated as things should get. And when we're looking at DSE, I think we should get back to some of these basics. The regulations provide a structure, but we need to go back to what is a good position for an individual for their body to work well and not develop problems. So many of the things that we need to talk about with evolving workplaces, flexible workers, are now having to be looked after by the individuals themselves. And this is where I think, it would be good to see within the regulations some sort of self-responsibility, because so many of these issues come under the banner of wellness that I think is being talked about a lot today. So wellness as both physical, but also as far as emotional and mental stress. The big debate about sit-stand desks and about wellness, I'm sure a lot of you have seen some of this research, and here's some here as well. Sitting all day to work, we know causes problems. It's not good physically, musculoskeletally, but also not good for your circulation or also your hormone control, that sort of thing. So, if we're sitting down for this much time, as you can see, 19 hours a day, they reckon it shortens our lives. So this is all part of a bigger debate we have. The regulations identified this as well. The regulations, as you can see, identified in its guidance that sedentary tasks, can aggravate pre-existing conditions, and that actually the work tasks needs to be clearly regulated with breaks and movement away from the static sort of DSE work. So it is there within the guidance document of the regulations. So really, I'm going to have to draw this to a close, or else I'm going to be in trouble for overrunning again. I just really want to sort of summarize quickly and say, look, we do have problems with technology, and as things evolve, the way we manage it has to evolve with it. We should use the DSE regulations as a foundation for action, and then focus how to best equip each person to fulfill their role and look after their health. So I think the DSE regulations are fit for purpose. They are a really good start. They give us the building blocks. They give us the basics to work on. But in fact, they're not the whole answer. And we could certainly do with some up-to-date guidance to guide us as to how to best manage the new ways of working and the new technologies, so we can properly inform our staff so they can embrace that and take that on board and work better. So I hope that's sort of given you some thoughts. There are lots of specific issues we could talk about, and John and I were talking earlier and saying we might actually do a follow-up one webinar to this, but I hope that sort of sets the scene. So at this point, I'm going to sign off for the moment and hand over to John.
Well, thank you very much for that, Catherine. Yes, as ever, quite a lot of food for thought, but it was good to see you simplifying the issues, or advising that we simplify the issues. I think that is important. It can all get lost in the mysteries of regulation, whereas what we need to do, as you say, is do what we can to help the individual. And I would probably say, and as long as we record it, then we're unlikely to get into trouble in terms of the regulations. I certainly agree with you that the guidance perhaps could be updated, should be updated. I mean, we do see that office health and the DSE regulations are closely intertwined. And there's so many questions being raised in the media these days about aspects which aren't specifically mentioned in the guidance. Things like, I think as you said, sit-stand desks, there's tablets, bariatric chairs and so forth. these aren't really addressed, well, they're certainly not evident in the guidance, and we could do with some help, I think, in these areas. And if I can speak to our listeners today, if you have any specific thoughts about what you would like to have guidance on in the DSE, or attached to the DSE regulations, we have sort of two perhaps avenues we could pursue. One is that we would be happy to collect these thoughts, and if you want to send them to us either via this website or by emailing us, then we would coordinate them and put them forward to the appropriate HSE group for consideration, because as I understand it, they are looking to update the guidance at the moment. So this is an appropriate time to think about this. But equally, we as the organisers of these webinars, we would be very happy perhaps to take up some of these issues and to try and therefore present some webinars which address some of these questions. Just some thoughts, but do please get in touch with us. Now, Catherine, I said that I would spend time now asking you some of the questions which have come in, and I think I've got some gremlins with my system because my question panel has disappeared. And all I can say is apologies to everyone for that, but what we will do is to put the questions on the website later this afternoon along with Catherine's answers. And indeed, you will be able to download or to listen again to this webinar on the website a bit later on this afternoon. Perhaps, Catherine, I personally have one question because it came up this morning when I was reading the paper, and there was an article I saw about obesity being no business of the employer. And surely we've got some responsibilities for these people. So would you see the current regs able to cover this, or the guidance indeed, even generically, as you say?
Well, I mean, certainly, does the DSE regs cover it? Well, I mean, the chair must be, suitable and comfortable. So, I mean, that may be an issue. But certainly, we have other duties, don't we, with people, to make sure that the equipment is suitable for the user. And certainly, if you have a very obese worker, then some of the equipment may not be suitable and may put them at risk of other things.
Well, yes, I did. I mean, when I was reading the article, I was put to thinking a bit wider than the DSE regs as well, in that the evacuation chairs and so forth will have to be suitable for these people. So there are a lot of issues.
Well, also, I mean, things like canteen chairs and toilets and things like that too, and I think it's often not the obesity, it's maybe the health effects that come as a result of the obesity can be quite a problem for people too, as well as actually the physical dimensions of a workstation, and I have found people who struggle with conventional equipment simply because of the biomechanics just don't work. I mean, just like somebody who is exceedingly petite, we have a similar set of scenarios often with them too.
Absolutely,
yeah. No, I think it is something we need to deal with.
Yes. And I know in a couple of months' time we actually have a webinar dealing with some of these obesity issues. I can't remember who's presenting that, but that does bring me to one point of admin, which is our next webinar, which I think is on your screen, should be on your screens at the moment, is entitled "When the Inspector Calls."